bringing you a steady stream of thought-provoking ideas and cutting-edge innovation. You're listening to Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And if you are a parent, this episode is for you, because we're going to be talking about something that, whether your kids are in a government school or homeschool or unschool or whatever, the topic today is something that I think that we all feel as parents. We feel inadequate. We feel underprepared, incapable. There's a lot of self-doubt, especially among moms. And so we want to have our guest join us today, who wrote a very interesting article that we will link to on today's show notes page. Laura Blodgett is I don't know, Laura, how would you describe, you're an eclectic woman. You have a diverse set of interests. So give us your brief bio, and then I'd love to dive in with you on this subject.
Well, most relevant to what we're talking about here, I am a mom of 7, and we taught all of them through high school. And they're all functioning adults now, amazingly. Other than that, I like to garden, so I've been studying Chinese for about 10 years with a tutor, and I play the flute, and I'm trying to teach myself the guitar and the piano. So I am not bored.
And you're actually what we would call, from Brian, one of our previous episodes, Laura is an autodidact.
That
right?
she is.
All right. So
I don't know what that means.
Well, you can go back and listen to our whatever episode number that was. We'll link to it.
That.
So
I will do that.
It's a self-taught learner. It's someone who loves to learn and is often exposing themselves to new ideas and new information, rather than just passively being taught by really an expert, which is what we're talking about today. So it's a really good segue. Laura, we're going to link to this for our listeners. Today's show notes page is societyandthestate.com/32. And so we'll link to this article where you ask the question at the outset, do you need experts to teach your children? So let me set up maybe a scenario for you, and you correct where I'm wrong or where the misconception is. So often, in my experience, parents feel that they are ill-equipped to teach their children, whether they're farming them out to, teachers all day long, but then they have to help with homework at home, and, I don't know calculus, and I don't know biology, and I don't know this, that, and the other, or whether the parent is assuming more responsibility for that education and doing it in the home, at least part-time or even full-time. I have run into this so often, whether talking to people and doing these Tuttle Twins books that we do, or the Passion-Driven Education book I've done. I've had a lot of conversations with especially the moms who just, they deprecate themselves, right? They see themselves as unable to teach their children because they're not an expert in all the different subjects that they think their children need to learn. Why do you suppose that feeling is so prevalent?
Well, I think there are multiple factors that come together for that. And one is that it's a very normal thing to feel overwhelmed by the responsibility of parenting, especially when you're new at it. But it's always changing, too. There are always challenges. And people get confused, if I can say that, or they misdiagnose their concern with lack of ability. So not feeling like you have everything completely under control does not mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're problem solving. Another part of it that I would say is because of the way our governmental institutions try to market their stranglehold over education, they do their best to make us feel like we can't do those things, like we can't learn or we can't guide our children in a lot of things. And I obviously think we can. And if I could back up just a little bit to what you were saying about me learning a lot, I really feel like my journey with teaching my own kids was so fertile for my learning experience and my ability to self-teach. When I was a student, I was one of those people that I did really well with tests and workbooks, because if you just tell me what I need to fill in, what I need to say to get the right answers, and I could do that really well. And it was challenging for me to both be vulnerable as a parent when I'm first teaching my young kids and say, I don't know. Let's look this up. Let's investigate this together.
Yeah.
That was difficult for me because that's not how the school system prepared me. It's not how, I don't think it's how it prepares a lot of people. And, but then in doing that, I discovered a joy of learning that I didn't have prior to teaching my kids at home.
So in your article, you talk about at the outset, what is education? And it's a silly question, or it might come off that way, but it's essential to understand because I've seen the same thing that you write about, and that is people misunderstand what true education is, what education is all about. There is institutionalized schooling, which takes as its credo the indoctrination of a child in a diverse, range of topics. Every child must learn everything in basically the same way at the same age. And so you have the factory, the industrialization of information, cramming it down into the minds of children, or really, in one ear and often out the other after they've been tested and they can, do a brain dump and forget about it. And so, so for many people, that is education. Oh yeah, every kid needs to learn these things. Well, why does every child need to learn the Pythagorean theorem, right? Or why does every child need to learn the date in which the French and Indian War happened, when you can, like, any adult is just going to look that up on Wikipedia? Like no one memorizes that. And yet many people treat education that way. What is the alternative? How do you perceive a better education outlook to be, if not that?
Well, let me preface my answer with saying that when I started teaching my kids at home, I was obviously doing it. Since I'm 56, I was doing it before a lot of people were doing it. There was a very small wave of people that had taught their kids at home before I started, and I was taught in public school. So I definitely had the mindset ingrained in me, and I had to grow out of it about covering all of the subjects like the institutional schools do. But over time, I discovered and this is just such a perfect example of you don't have to know everything. It's just that I was trying to teach my children, and I discovered that once you teach them to read, once you teach them some basic things about math, and then you teach them to evaluate things, a lot of other things just flow. And I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, on one hand, it is easy. On the other hand, it's labor intensive because kids simply are labor intensive. That's one reason why a lot of people are so at ease with the idea of sending them off somewhere all day. It seems easier, and I emphasize seems there because I don't think in the long run it is easier. But so going back, so if you have taught them the basic tools that they need to learn, you can learn a lot of things from any subject. So going along with the idea of interest-led studying, I had one child who was very interested in gardening and plants and just being outside, and he was constantly in motion. And so we could use that to teach things about biology, about money. He would write about the things that interested him. And that kind of leads me to another part of it is that on one hand, I think the interest-directed education is really important, but there's also, in my husband's and my estimation, a point where you have to help the child to enjoy or at least engage in some skills that are going to be useful. Like, say, if they don't like to write, we still did our best to make that interesting to them because we felt it was a valuable skill. Do you see the difference there?
Certainly. Now, Laura, you mentioned institutional schools, and one of the things that we can observe as parents is that institutional schools, they make a pretty big deal out of, look, we're going to tell you what your child is best suited for. They have the aptitude tests and, career guidance. I mean, it seems like it goes younger and younger all the time. Help us understand why parents need to be the primary expert on each child rather than outsourcing it to institutional experts?
There is no test or computerized or group test where somebody just sort of asks a bunch of questions and evaluates that is going to give you the insight into what a child needs to learn or what they're good at, besides which different kids are good test takers or not good test takers. I can think of a particular example of one of my children that just cried over math. And we did require some algebra and geometry because it was our goal to make it possible for them to go to college, which is, that's one reason you would do that. But I would also just quickly add that I think too many people push math too early, and I didn't do a lot of heavy duty math in the lower grades. But help me back to the question.
Okay, so parents we want what's best for our kids, but I think there's a mindset, particularly in the institutional setting, that's where I'm going to find the experts who can really do what's right by my kids. You make a very strong case that parents, no, you are actually the expert on your child and should be.
Yeah, I've mentioned before my oldest child, when she got to about the 12 years old, it was sixth grade for a lot of people, and she became more aware of kids in the neighborhood beginning school in the fall. And without any prompting whatsoever from me, she turned to me and she said, "Mom, how do their teachers know what they need?" Because she recognized, she knew enough that they got a new teacher every year, that it was in big classrooms, but she, even with her limited understanding, saw how I interacted with her. There's just no replacing relationship in education. I guess that's probably the most succinct way to put it.
And Laura, that's how you put it in your article. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to read a small portion of what you wrote on this precise topic. You said, the more time you spend with a child, the more you become the expert on that particular child. The more time you spend with a child, the more the relationship will grow, and the child will be able to learn more effectively from you. The more you understand the child, the better you'll be able to teach him or guide him in learning. And that seems to be the critical component, because you say in the next paragraph, and I agree, there's such a lack of relationship in the institutional setting. And it's that lack of relationship that makes it so that the teacher's focus is not on the individual, it's on the information. It's like,
right.
Here's what needs to be learned. You all need to learn this, rather than, hey, Johnny, hey, Anna, like, what do you need to know? How are you doing? How can I make this relevant to you? What's your life like that I can help you make sense of this issue in a very, individualized way, so that you can, understand what we're talking about and internalize it and see the relevance to your life. And there's, I guess the question, right, because a lot of people just can't homeschool, is there a way around that within an institutionalized setting? Or is it just that parents who are putting their children in that school setting need to kind of offset or counterbalance it with their own efforts in the home?
That's a difficult question. I have talked to so many different people who have made so many different choices about education. And I know that many, many parents are making the best decision they can at the time with the information. They're trying to make a good decision. And I also know that when both parents are not necessarily on the same page with it, it gets more complicated as well. But the bottom line is that I don't see how you can replace the time and relationship that is given over to an institutional school. I used to shy away from comparing the public or institutional schools to orphanages, but I visited an orphanage in Zambia, Africa, a few years ago, and I came back with a different perspective and seeing how similar they were. And I can't do enough to encourage people. I want so badly to say, you're missing relationship with your children when you send them off for that many hours. I've seen people in all kinds of situations in life, from single moms to people with lots of kids, teach their kids at home very effectively when relationship and just what was best for their children was their main goal. And so I know it can be done. It seems like it can't because, like we've said, based on all the different things we're told, we would think we can't provide them a good education outside of that. And so it discourages people from trying.
Laura,
go ahead.
When the parent realizes that there is a need for an expert in their child's education, and I'm talking primarily in a non-institutional setting, what are some of the guidelines that you would recommend people follow to make sure that they're accessing the kind of experts that they need?
Well, I think that one of the most important things is to really think hard about which subject or subjects that you might want to do that, because the more time that you try to have your kids somewhere else, the more it just disrupts the whole flow of the good stuff that you get from teaching them yourself. So, for instance, we tried a couple of times, most specifically with one daughter, we thought that having the band experience in the public school, because we could do the dual enrollment, would be a good option. Now, I might say that before we started that, I sort of did have the idea that that would be more of an expert experience. And in retrospect, that was not an expert experience. We did not tap into an expert in any way that I could tell. And that may vary from school to school. But more than that, the time sink and the whole mindset that they have for some of the classes, it just took so much every day for her to go to that. They wanted to do fundraisers. It just sort of started to take over our whole life just to even have her go to one class. And a lot of people try to do like the homeschool co-ops and things like that. So I think what I'm trying to get to is that if it's a time sink, is that the right way to put it? If it's sucking time out of your life, then it's probably not a good result. It's not getting what you want out of it. I did an expert for Spanish, and the kids took music lessons. That was on average once a week. I had a relationship with those people that did that where they knew I was the one in charge of the education. And I also supplemented and directed and encouraged that during the rest of the week. And incidentally, I accidentally understand a lot of Spanish now, even though I can't speak it.
Laura, one of the questions that I had in reading your article was, is anybody an expert? You know, because at the end of the day, people have highly specialized knowledge, and that can be of great value when, you want your child to learn an instrument or you want to learn everything there is to know about botany. But in my mind, as I talk to parents, it's not that they necessarily want their children to have highly specialized knowledge in one field. Every parent wants their children to be kind of well-rounded, is the term.
Right.
And
right.
It makes me think, kind of to your point about relationships, that the true expert is the very individual who doesn't see themselves so often as an expert, the parent. And because, as you point out, they are the expert in that child. They know the individuality. They know the personality. They know the quirks, the problems, the challenges, the talents, everything else about that child better than any teacher, school administrator, tutor, ever will. And it seems to me then that it's this weird paradox that parents are always looking for a crutch. They're looking for support. They're looking for someone else who knows, who studied. And yet they should be looking at themselves because they are the ones who know, not because they know everything there is about that subject that they want their children to learn, but because they know how best their child will learn, they can then go out with that child together and find the resources, find the tutor, find the website, find the videos that will best speak to their child. Am I wrong on that? It just seems to me that this weird paradox that we're in.
Well, I think you hit on the idea there that you have to use, you could rephrase what expert, you could say someone with more knowledge. Think of them more as a resource, not as the one who is teaching your children. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost that parents want to find someone else to teach their child, period, when instead it seems to me that it would be better explained as finding the optimal way for the child to learn. So the emphasis is not on the expert, not on that outside source, but the focus, the attention is on the child, and say, well, we know you, we know how best you learn, so let's go together to find what will speak best to you. And maybe that will be a so-called, expert, an individual who can be a tutor or a teacher, a TED Talk or whatever. But it just seems to me that so often the attention is opposite of what it should be. The focus is on the external, the expert, rather than on the internal, the individual.
Right. And I might add right there that I mentioned getting a Spanish tutor for my kids. And even that followed the model of relationship, because we ended up staying with that same tutor for probably 20 years. She knew my children practically better than some of our relatives. She spent so much time teaching them, and it might be unusual to find someone that you can keep that long term of a relationship with, but it definitely benefited my kids. And most of them don't even remember not knowing Spanish.
One of the things that you pointed out in your article that just jumped off the page at me was the idea of teaching your students to become experts. And one of the lines in there that really just, again, contrasted the idea of parents being experts on their children, seeking out the right experts at the right time and not just entrusting it to the institutions, is you pointed out how the institutions sometimes treat those students almost as if they were captives. And that's something you say a real expert would never do.
Yeah, I could give a college example also. My younger two are still in college, and they are constantly gritting their teeth at how the professors on the whole treat them like they're children and like they have nothing to say about anything. And each of my kids come back from their first few weeks at over their first few weeks of college and into it, and they say, "Thank you for not putting us in an institutional setting any sooner. This is just horrible."
Laura, we've enjoyed visiting with you today. You have a number of different websites. We're going to link to your article, Do You Need Experts to Teach Your Children? What are some of the other blogs where people can get a glimpse of what your life is all about?
Well, if you're interested in learning Chinese, I have funlearningchinese.com. If you are interested in some interesting twists on Bible readings, sort of some of them from a libertarian perspective, I wrote some on-the-street kind of reporter articles and do some vocabulary study on BibleNewsPress.com. I have another one that is funfitnessafter50.com because I like to stay active and I'm a barefoot runner. And then actually my very first blog that I split all of these off of is dailyimprovisations.com, and that's more home-centered, where I talk about gardening and sewing and sometimes travel and the best places I find chocolate.
We need a new website that will link to all your websites. We'll call it lauratheautodidact.com.
I was recently listened to The Renaissance Man and somebody else that started a blog through or a podcast through the Tom Woods group. And I heard the term polymath for the first time. And I thought, there are more people like me, because a lot of people think I'm a little crazy nuts. And I thought about, well, what could I cut out of this and what could I cut out of this? But I just really have fun with it all. And I think, again, I have to point back to teaching my own kids and also letting yourself have fun with education. And in education, in the things that different people need to learn, even if it's something that you are interested in. And this is something I always taught my kids. At the beginning, it can be so interesting. And at the end, it can be so rewarding. But no matter what you do, in the middle, there's that part that's a little harder to keep going with, that can seem tedious. And you have to help your kids learn to deal with that so that they're not just flitting about helplessly, but they can grab hold of what they're interested in a new and different sort of way.
Well, Laura, I really liked how you said it earlier, that for you, all this learning that you're doing with your children has benefited you. It's not just about teaching your children what they need to know to be a good worker bee when they're older. It's about this journey of discovery, a curiosity about the world around us. So I see in you a kindred spirit, someone who's interested in and curious about many things. We'll link to this article and some of your websites at today's show notes page, which is societyandthestate.com/32. Laura, thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
You've been listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.